Okay, I put the guard back on just for a little bit, and I've taken some bluing and put it on the areas that we're going to be laying out. So the first thing I want to do, while the guard is in place, I'm going to scribe a nice deep line right across here on both sides, and so that can guide my tang tapering, and I know not to taper beyond this line. Now I'll get it close with the grinding belts, and then I'll actually put this in my rotary vise and I'll draw file that up to the finish line. So now we're going to take the guards back off, this time for quite a while, and we're going to lay out our bevel guides, taper, and our center line to keep us from going in too deep on either side. Alright, so the first line that I want to scribe down is that center line. That's going to be my reference, just to make sure we keep everything symmetrical on the back side of the knife. So 110 thousandths, I've set this to 55. So we're just going to score a light line, and that will grind off when we do our finishing. Okay, so we're going to be grinding this down pretty thin. Generally on a heavier knife, such as a deer hunting knife, I like to leave about 50 to 60 thousandths between my lines to grind to for my cutting edge. On this knife, I'm going to go just a little bit smaller. I'm going to allow 30 thousandths between the lines, and from there we're going to come down to a pretty keen cutting edge. You want the angle of your cutting edge on a knife like this to be right at about 12 degrees per side, or 10 degrees. You want these to be very sharp. So we're going to set our height gauge and get to that. Okay, so I set my height gauge to leave 30 thousandths between the cutting lines, or between the grind lines. So we're going to run a line that way, and then we're rolling the knife over, and we're going to run one on the other side. Just push your blade down, don't let it move, and then just check. Alright, so now we're going to scribe for the tang taper. Okay, so when we're grinding the tang, the area that I'm going to be paying attention to is the point right back here. That's the furthest point back from the tip. So when our grind reaches these lines right here, we're done. You just want to make sure you watch as you grind, as your bluing disappears and your grind is showing. You want to make sure that you keep it square and not creep ahead, meaning you're holding it at a tilt. So if you just take your time and work carefully, when we get it just shy of this scribe line where the guard was, I'll put this in a vise, and we're going to draw file this till we get it finished up to that point. Just a few strokes, but that's going to make sure we stay flat, and it's going to make sure we don't overgrind, because our guards won't fit on it very effectively if there's a taper there. So these little steps you have to slow down and take your time on, but you'll be glad that you did. And decided to taper the tang first. And if you notice, I drilled one more hole in the knife, and what that's for is this. This is just push stick. So what it is, I made this wooden handle and a 3/8 rod that comes out, and the rod, this handle is drilled out, and I've got quite a bit of rod down inside of here because this will wear away, so you just pop the set screw loose, index it out, and you're good to go again. But this has a nice flat face that's square to this rod, so the idea is that locks in there like that. So as we're tapering, the pressure comes from the push stick. So you're just pushing in squarely, and you're moving this across. And this ceramic belt is going to be pretty aggressive. It won't take very long to get this thing down to our taper. So we grind a little bit, and the last area you want to put pressure in is up here. The taper's going to finish up here, so you just kind of let that float, and you eyeball this line against the top of your platen. So I just want to hold it just about there, push with my stick, and then check it and make sure that I'm creeping up squarely. And every now and again I'll turn it over to see how close I'm getting to my finish. So I shut the grinder off. I just wanted to show you basically what I'm doing. But now I'm not going to be photographing this, because when I grind these, I kind of like to be right up on it, and you wouldn't be able to see it anyway. But I'm going to be up on it like this, watching everything. So I'll come back when I finish the taper tang, and we'll give it a look. Okay, now with a fine single cut file that I've chalked, just starting right back here, and I'm just giving it some light strokes. It doesn't take much. And I just want to see that bluing just disappear to my scribe line, but this just gets everything evened out. So I'm stopping when I'm basically seeing influence from the file all along the tang. And that's it. Now we're going to roll it over. Thing's still hot from the grinder. I just now put it in here. We're going to do the same thing. Just draw filing. Tapering the tang on this took about 5 minutes, if that. By the way, your file only cuts this way. If you push back, you're dulling it. Alright, still hot. So now we're ready to grind the bevels. Yeah, look at that. I don't know if you can see it. Let me turn the view. Yeah, it's a nicely tapered tang. And it's going to make a difference in the appearance of the knife. Because remember, this is going to taper too. So your balance point of the knife is going to be just about where that guard is. Okay, we're working this down. We're at 220 grit now. And we're going to stay with that until I see everything going even and my layout lines are just on the very edge. Right now there's a little bit of steel on either side of them still. It's just a slow process. and you don't put much pressure. You don't want to dig a hole, so the only pressure I'm putting on here is my thumb, and I'm not pushing that hard. I'm simply supporting the knife with this finger and this hand, and then just gliding back and forth. You don't want to linger too long in any one spot, and it's turning out pretty nice. So we're going to continue on here, and on our way to 600 grit. Okay, so I switched to wet or dry. This is 400 grit. And from this point out in the build, all abrasives applied to this blade are going to be in this direction. And when we ground the blade to the shape it's in to this point, you know, obviously our belt was traveling in this direction. So it's putting scratches in the blade in this direction, and the blade is going to flex in this direction, so that's not a good combination. Think about when you're felling a tree. If you want it to fall in a direction or break in a certain direction, you put a notch, right? And same thing applies to tool steel, and it's probably more so with high carbon stainless like this. So what you want to do is get all of the transverse scratches out, and I don't care what grit you polish a blade to, you're still scratching it. It's just tiny scratches. But we're going to work this blade up to 600 grit in this fashion, and then we're going to put it into heat treatment, and then when it comes out of heat treatment, we're going to go back to a 600, and we're going all the way up to 2000, and that's about as fine a finish as I'm going to put on stainless. When you heat treat high carbon stainless like this, what you're really doing is you're just growing carbides within the matrix of the steel. And those carbides get fairly large in steels with a lot of chromium. So when you try to put a mirror finish, if it works, you're lucky. Most often you're going to get areas that have almost an orange peel look, and so those large carbides. And what you're doing when you buff, you're scooping the steel out between those carbides that doesn't have that same hardness, and it can be challenging to get a nice even mirror finish on any grade of stainless versus the 01 that I use. So I'm going to take this up to 2000 grit, which is a beautiful satin finish, and that is going to be all the finish the knife is going to need, and it's going to look good. So if you take your time and get your blade up to the fine grits on the belt grinder, you don't have to do a lot of this hand work. And if you keep the blade wet, that keeps the paper clean and cutting, and any transverse scratches are being shown to me as little shadows right now. And I just work those areas till those shadows disappear, and you're finished. We'll be going to heat treatment later today with this knife. And I'm looking to get it finished. So Brian messaged me, and besides my maker's mark, he asked if it would be possible if I could put DDG 39. Now that was the number of our ship. We served on the USS MacDonough, a guided missile destroyer, and it was DDG 39 was its designation. And I said, sure, I'm going to order the developer fluid I need. I have all the equipment to make my own stencils. I don't have any developer right now. But I'm going to be making a stencil with USS MacDonough DDG 39, and I'm going to put it on this side of the blade. My maker's mark will be over on this side, and then I'm going to try to place that logo right here. And I think that would be a nice touch. It's going to put off shipping the knife for about a week. Putting the logo on is the last thing that you do anyway. And I'll show that process. I'll do a separate video on making stencils for those of you that might want to try it. It's not a hard process. You do need a decent printer for your computer. But other than that, it's you can do it with fairly basic materials. You'll need an ultraviolet light, and you'll see that process. But yeah, I told him sure. I thought it'd be a cool idea to have our ship on the knife since he's an old shipmate. So that's what we're going to do. But back to this, and we'll come back for the heat treatment.